You look at this and you think, they made this more than 4,000 years ago. They actually built this. This is incredible.
Everyone is obsessed with the pyramids or the Colosseum, but the most important discovery of the century just happened quietly in a field in the South Caucasus.
Christian archaeology is a weapon of faith in the arsenal of proving to this modern scientific world that the stories in the Bible are real.
No one was looking for a vault. They were looking for walls. Instead, they found a floor plan that mimics the holiest sites in Jerusalem. It dates back to the very moment the world shifted from paganism to something new. But here is the deal. The way this building was destroyed suggests that someone wanted it forgotten, and they almost succeeded. The first sign of the vault. The red dust of the Ararat Plain has a way of hiding things. For nearly 2,000 years, farmers have plowed these fields, unaware that they were walking over a mystery that could rewrite the history of the ancient world. It is the kind of place where you expect to find a broken coin or maybe an arrow tip from a forgotten war. But what the team from the University of Münster found wasn't small. It was massive. And get this, it was shaped like an octagon. Now, you might be thinking, okay, it is just a shape, who cares? But in the world of archaeology, shapes are a language. A square is a house, a rectangle is a hall. But an octagon, that is a statement. That is a message sent from the architects of the 4th century directly to us. It signifies something holy, something that connects the earth to the heavens. The discovery happened in the ancient city of Artaxata. If you go back to the days of the Roman Empire, Artaxata wasn't just a dusty outpost. It was a metropolis. It was the capital of the Kingdom of Armenia for almost 600 years. Imagine the hustle of merchants, the clash of Roman legions, and the intrigue of royal courts. But over the centuries, the city fell silent. The mud brick walls melted back into the earth, and the glorious capital became a ghost town. In September of 2024, a team of German and Armenian archaeologists decided to take a closer look at a specific mound. They used geophysical methods, basically high-tech radar that can see through the dirt without shoveling a single ounce of soil. They were looking for the usual stuff, maybe a palace wall or a storehouse. Instead, the screens lit up with a perfect geometric anomaly. It measured about 98 feet in diameter. To put that in perspective, that is roughly the width of a modern basketball court, but built with ancient stone and mortar. It had a simple mortar floor and was paved with terracotta tiles. But the layout was the real shocker. It wasn't just a circle, it was 8-sided with cross-shaped extensions. This is where it gets wild. This specific layout is identical to the great memorial buildings of the early Christian world. We are talking about a style that historians usually only see in places like Rome or Jerusalem. Finding one here in the shadow of Mount Ararat is like finding a hidden chapter in a book you thought you had already finished reading. The team dug deeper. They found fragments of marble. Now, marble is not native to this exact patch of dirt. It had to be brought here. It was imported. That means whoever built this had money, power, and a serious desire to impress. This wasn't a local village shrine. This was a monument. They used radiocarbon dating on fragments found in the platforms. The results came back and they pointed to the mid-4th century. That is, the 300s. That makes this the oldest archaeologically documented church in the entire country of Armenia. Everyone's obsessed with being first in history. But in this case, being first is a massive deal because Armenia was the first nation in the world to adopt Christianity as its state religion. We have always known that from the texts. We have the legends of St. Gregory. But we lacked the physical smoking gun from that exact transition period. This octagonal building is that smoking gun. It is the vault that holds the architectural DNA of the very first state-sanctioned Christian church. It proves that while the Roman Empire was still arguing about gods and emperors, the Armenians were already building massive, complex cathedrals to a new faith. But here is the catch. This building did not just fall apart on its own. The way the marble is scattered and the way the walls were leveled suggests a violent history. It stood for centuries, but then it vanished. It was buried, hidden, and forgotten. Why would someone bury a structure this important? The radar scan revealed a secret that history tried to delete. From dungeon to cathedral. To understand why this vault of stone matters, you have to understand the blood and the madness that built it. The story of Artaxata isn't just about bricks. It is about a king who lost his mind and a saint who survived the impossible. Let's rewind to the year 301. The Roman Empire is pressing from the west, and the Persian Empire is pressing from the east. Stuck in the middle is King Tiridates III of Armenia. He is a pagan king, strong, ruthless, and loyal to the old gods. Then you have Gregory. Gregory wasn't a king, he was a preacher. He came to the royal court with a new message, a forgotten gospel of sorts, distinct from the pagan traditions. Tiridates didn't want to hear it. In fact, he was so offended by Gregory's refusal to offer flowers to a pagan goddess that he had Gregory thrown into a pit. This wasn't just a jail cell. It was a dungeon deep in the ground, filled with snakes and filth. It was a death sentence. The place was called Khor Virap. It was right there in Artaxata. Gregory survived in that pit for 13 years. 13 years. Legend says a woman secretly lowered bread to him every day. But while Gregory was rotting in the dark, things above ground were going terrible for the king. The story goes that King Tiridates went mad. The legends say he literally turned into a wild boar, roaming the forests, tearing at his own skin. It sounds like a fairy tale, right? But strip away the magic and you have a ruler having a complete mental breakdown under the pressure of war and guilt. His sister had a dream. The dream told her that only the prisoner in the pit could save the king. So they dragged Gregory out of the hole. He was ragged, barely human after a decade of darkness. But he prayed for the king, and the king was healed. This is the moment that changed the world. In gratitude, Tiridates didn't just say thanks, he declared that the entire nation would follow Gregory's God. In the year 301, Armenia became the first Christian nation on earth. This happened more than a decade before Rome did it. So here is the deal. When you have a shift that massive, you need to build monuments to prove it. You need to stamp your new authority on the land. You tear down the old temples and you build new ones. The archaeologists believe this octagonal church is the direct result of that moment. It corresponds to the legend. Tradition says that after he was freed, Gregory, now called the Illuminator, built churches in Artaxata. For centuries, we thought these were just stories to make the church look good. But finding this floor plan confirms it. The dating matches, the location matches. This isn't just a building, it is a victory monument. It is the physical manifestation of Gregory's triumph over the pit. The octagonal shape is crucial here. In ancient Christian symbolism, the number 8 represents the 8th day, the day of resurrection, the new beginning that comes after the 7 days of creation. By building an octagon, they were literally writing a message in stone that said, "This is a new era." They brought in marble from the Mediterranean. They mixed simple local clay with foreign luxury. It shows a kingdom that was trying to look outward, trying to connect with the West, trying to say, we are part of something bigger now. But history is rarely a straight line. The king converted, the people followed, and the temples rose. Yet Artaxata was a target. Being the capital meant you had a bullseye on your back. The Persians, who were Zoroastrian, were not happy about this shift to Christianity. Tensions rose. Armies marched. The ground we are digging up today holds the charcoal and ash of those conflicts. This church stood as a beacon of the new faith, but beacons attract lightning. The vault wasn't just a place of worship, it was a political statement that could get you killed. The king was healed, but the city was doomed to burn. Decoding the floor plan. So what most people don't realize is that ancient architecture is basically a code. If you know how to read it, the stones start talking. The team from Munster didn't just find walls, they found a blueprint that connects Armenia to the very center of the ancient world. Let's look closely at the materials. The floor was paved with terracotta. This is baked earth. It is humble, durable, and local. But the decoration was imported marble. This mix of local and foreign is a massive clue. It tells us that the Armenian church wasn't isolated. They were importing materials and ideas from the Roman West. The shape is the real key. An octagon with cross-shaped extensions. This is not a standard design for a local parish. This is a martyrium style. That is a fancy word for a building designed to mark a holy site, usually a tomb or a place where something miraculous happened. Think about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem or the Golden Octagon in Antioch. These were the superstars of ancient architecture. Finding a building like this in Archaeologists is like finding a piece of the Vatican in the middle of a cornfield in Nebraska. It tells us that Archaeologists was cosmopolitan. It was plugged into the global network. The cross-shaped extensions are interesting too. They point to the four corners of the world. It is a physical representation of the command to spread the gospel everywhere. But remember, this is the 4th century. The Bible as we know it wasn't even fully assembled into one book yet. The gospel here wasn't a paperback you carried in your pocket, it was the building itself. The architecture was the story. The archaeologists found the remains of wooden platforms. Using radiocarbon dating, they pinpointed the age to the mid-4th century. This is incredible precision. It confirms that the building was in use right when the kingdom was at its peak power. But here is the catch. The church wasn't just abandoned, it was dismantled. The Persian Empire, centered in what is now Iran, was the superpower next door. They constantly fought with Rome, and Armenia was the buffer zone. When the Persians invaded, they often destroyed Christian sites to break the spirit of the people. There is evidence that Artaxata was destroyed by the Persian King of Kings, Shapur II, later in the 4th century. It is very likely that this beautiful octagonal vault was a casualty of that war. The marble was smashed, the roof was burned, the walls were toppled, and then the mud took over. The rivers flooded, the dust blew in, layer by layer the octagon was buried. It became a lump in the ground, then a hill, then a field. For over 1,000 years, shepherds walked their sheep over the terracotta tiles, completely unaware that the first church was inches beneath their sandals. It is crazy to think about how much history is just waiting for someone to dig a hole in the right spot. The discovery also validates the written histories. For a long time, modern historians looked at the ancient Armenian texts with a bit of skepticism. They thought the descriptions of grand churches were exaggerations, propaganda to make the king look good. But this find says, no, they were telling the truth. The grandeur was real, the marble was real, the scale was real. It forces us to take the old forgotten gospels and histories much more seriously. The stones prove the legends were actually facts. So we have an octagon, we have a date, we have a legend. But what does it actually mean for us today? Why does a pile of rocks in Armenia matter to someone sitting in New York or London? It matters because it changes the timeline. We usually think of Western Europe as the center of Christian history. We think of Rome. But this discovery pulls the center of gravity east. It reminds us that the Caucasus, this rugged mountain bridge between Europe and Asia, was the laboratory where Western civilization was actually being forged. The archaeologists from Munster and the Armenian Academy of Sciences are not done yet. They are going to keep digging. They want to find out who was the bishop here. They want to see if there are tombs beneath the floor. And that is the thing about vaults. They usually hold something. Is there a crypt underneath the octagon? Is there a reliquary? The prompt mentioned a vault linked to a forgotten gospel. While we haven't found a physical book with pages, the building itself is the vault. It held the gospel of a new identity for an entire nation. It held the secret that a people could survive invasion, destruction, and time itself as long as they kept their faith. The geometry of shadows. Now, if we step away from the safe academic explanations for a moment, things get really interesting. Mainstream archaeology tells us that the octagon shape was just a popular trend, like a fashion statement in stone. They say it was imported from Rome or Jerusalem simply because it looked nice or felt holy. But there is a growing group of theorists and independent researchers who think that is a massive oversimplification. They believe the shape wasn't just aesthetic. They believe it was functional. We need to talk about what an octagon actually does. In the ancient world, architecture was never just about providing a roof over your head. It was about manipulating the environment. It was about controlling light, sound, and even the perception of reality. Let's look at the acoustics. 8-sided structures have very specific sound properties. When you stand in the dead center of an octagon and speak, the sound waves hit the walls at angles that create a unique resonance. It amplifies the voice in a way that feels almost supernatural. If you were a priest or a magician in the 4th century standing on that central terracotta tile, your voice wouldn't just sound louder. It would sound like it was coming from everywhere at once. It would sound like the voice of a god. Some theorists suggest that this building wasn't just a church for prayer, it was a machine for conversion. Remember, King Tiridates and Gregory were trying to flip an entire nation from one belief system to another overnight. You don't do that with just a polite speech. You do that with shock and awe. You build a structure that physically overwhelms the senses of anyone who walks inside. But it goes deeper than sound. Let's talk about what lies beneath the floor. The radar scans showed us the foundations of the church. But radar has limits. It bounces back when it hits a hard surface. If there is a floor, the radar often sees that floor and stops. It doesn't always tell you what is 5 or 10 feet under that floor. Here is the wild theory. What if the church was built to seal something in? Before Christianity arrived, Armenia was a stronghold of Zoroastrianism and the worship of Mithras. Mithras was a solar deity, a god of light and contracts. And where did the followers of Mithras worship? They didn't build giant cathedrals reaching for the sky. They worshipped in caves. They worshipped underground. They built mithraeums, subterranean temples designed to mimic the cosmos. There is a very strong possibility that this octagonal church was built directly on top of a major pagan site. This was a common tactic in the ancient world. You don't just destroy the enemy's temple, you build your holy site right on top of theirs to physically and spiritually suppress their power. So imagine this, the archaeologists found the church floor. But what if 10 feet below that terracotta pavement there is still a hollow chamber? What if the dungeon theme of Gregory's story wasn't just about the pit he was thrown into, but about the pits they filled up? Some researchers speculate that the octagon shape is actually a lid. In sacred geometry, the octagon is often seen as the transition between the circle, heaven, and the square, earth. By placing this shape here, they might have been trying to create a metaphysical seal over a location that was considered a gateway to the underworld or the old gods. And then there is the solar alignment. We know the builders used imported marble and precise measurements. Did they also use astronomy? In many ancient octagonal structures, the windows were placed so that on specific days, like the equinox or the solstice, a beam of sunlight would hit a specific spot on the floor. If this building follows that pattern, it suggests a level of sophistication that goes way beyond stacking bricks. It implies they possessed advanced astronomical knowledge. Perhaps the illuminator title for Gregory wasn't just a metaphor for spiritual light. Maybe it was literal. Maybe he understood the movement of the sun and stars in a way that allowed him to build a structure that acted like a giant calendar or a solar clock. When the Persians destroyed the city, they didn't just knock down the walls, they leveled it. They tried to erase it. Why go to that much trouble for a simple church? Unless it wasn't just a church, unless it was a repository of knowledge or power that the Persian Empire viewed as a direct threat. If there is a hidden chamber beneath that floor, a Mithraic temple or a secret archive, it would explain why the site was so heavily targeted. The red dust of Artaxata might be hiding a double-decker mystery. We have found the top layer, the Christian Victory Monument, but we haven't even scratched the surface of what might be sleeping in the dark beneath it. The Vault of the Flood. This brings us to the second and perhaps the most controversial theory surrounding the discovery at Artaxata. It connects this specific building to the most famous mountain in human history, which looms just a few miles away, Mount Ararat. You cannot talk about ancient Armenia without talking about the Ark. According to the traditions, Artaxata is located in the very shadow of the mountain where humanity supposedly restarted after the Great Flood. For thousands of years, explorers, CIA pilots, and satellite analysts have been scanning the ice cap of Mount Ararat looking for petrified wood. They are looking for the boat. But here is a wild thought that some alternative historians have proposed. What if we are looking in the wrong place? What if the treasure of the Ark wasn't the boat itself, but what was on the boat? If you were tasked with saving civilization from a global cataclysm, you wouldn't just save animals. You would save knowledge. You would save seeds. You would save the history of the world before the water rose. The theory goes like this. When the survivors came down from the mountain, they didn't just leave their precious cargo on a glacier, they would have brought it down to the valley. They would have built a secure place to keep the records, the artifacts, and the tech of the pre-flood world. Artaxata is in that valley. It is one of the oldest continuously inhabited spots in the region. Could this octagonal vault be a successor to that original repository? Let's look at the timing again. King Tiridates and Gregory convert the nation. They build this massive, unique structure with a floor plan that mimics the holiest sites in Jerusalem. Why? Maybe it wasn't just to copy Jerusalem, maybe it was to house a relic of equal importance. There are legends in the Armenian tradition that speak of sacred items kept by the early kings. The most famous is the Holy Lance, or the Spear of Destiny, the weapon said to have pierced the side of Christ. We know that the lance is currently kept in the Gaghard Monastery in Armenia. But where was it before that? Some suspect it was here, in Artaxata. If this octagonal building was designed as a martyrium, a place to hold a holy object, it puts the destruction of the city in a whole new light. When the Persian king Shapur II invaded, he was obsessed with capturing the glory of the Armenian kings. In the ancient Persian mindset, kings possessed a mystical quality called far, or glory. To capture a king's capital was to capture his power. If the octagon was holding a relic, whether it was the spear or perhaps ancient text relating to the pre-flood world believed to be stored near Ararat, then the Persian attack was a heist. The fact that the marble was smashed and scattered suggests a frantic search. It looks like the invaders tore the building apart looking for something specific. They ripped up the floors, they toppled the pillars, they weren't just vandalizing, they were looting. And here is where the forgotten gospel concept comes back into play. The prompt mentioned a vault linked to a forgotten gospel. In the 4th century, there were many texts circulating that didn't make it into the final Bible. There were books of prophecy, books of secret wisdom, and histories that contradicted the official Roman narrative. Gregory the Illuminator spent 13 years in a pit. That is a long time to think. It is a long time to hallucinate, or to communicate with things others cannot see. When he came out, he had a power over the king that was absolute. What if Gregory found something in the depths of Khor Virap that changed history? We are told he survived for 13 years in a deep pit, kept alive only by a widow tossing him scraps of bread. But does that really add up? 13 years is a lifetime in total darkness. Some wilder theorists suggest that Gregory didn't just survive on bread and water. They believe he survived because he wasn't just sitting in a hole, he was exploring. What if the pit connected to a massive older tunnel system? He might have accessed a subterranean archive, a library of lost knowledge that had been forgotten by the pagans centuries before. This changes the entire motivation for what happened next. When Gregory finally came to power, his first move was to build the octagon. History says it was a church, but the blueprint suggests something else. It looks like he built a new vault for whatever he found down there. This would explain the frantic urgency of the construction. It would explain why they imported heavy marble from hundreds of miles away while the country was still politically unstable and poor. You don't go to that kind of trouble just for aesthetics. You do it because you need a high-security container and you need it immediately. It isn't just digging up a religious site. They are digging up a crime scene. They are standing over the location of a grand theft that happened 1,600 years ago. The floor plan itself is the biggest clue. The cross shape pointing to the 4 corners of the earth might not just mean spread the word, it could be a warning or even a map. In ancient cartography, X always marks the spot. The octagon is the dead center. Whatever was stored in there, be it a physical relic of the crucifixion, a map of the antediluvian world before the flood, or the true written record of Gregory's years in the dark, it was important enough to build a palace around. More importantly, it was dangerous enough for a rival empire to want to wipe it off the face of the earth. When the invaders came, they didn't just loot the octagon, they burned it to the ground to ensure the secret stayed buried. The red dust covers everything now. But if the archaeologists dig just a few feet deeper, or if they find a hollow space that the radar missed, we might finally find out that the first Christian nation was guarding a secret that the rest of the world has completely forgotten. So knowing that an entire cathedral was hiding under a farm for centuries, do you think we have found most of ancient history, or are we literally walking over lost civilizations every day? It makes you look at the ground differently. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button and subscribe for more lost history.